The Galactic Council had always been a place of delicate balance, a place where diplomacy met power and where alien species, from the towering Irani to the microscopic ZYNS, worked together, or at least tried to. A vast, floating platform suspended in space, it was a monumental structure that gleamed like a diamond under the light of 1,000 suns. Here, species that had never even imagined the possibility of meeting one another in their earliest days now sat side by side, attempting to solve the universe's most difficult problems. But today, something felt off. The vast council hall buzzed with the low hum of quiet conversations, as the species of the council took their places. From the slithering, tendril-faced croc to the six-eyed, tentacled drac, each representative made their way into the assembly hall. The seats were arranged in a perfect circle, designed to allow each race equal standing and to remind everyone that the council's power was derived from unity. At the head of the room, amidst the sea of otherworldly creatures, a lone figure stood. Commander Ellen Hale, an anomaly in the sea of alien life. A human, small, fragile compared to the towering presences that surrounded her. Yet despite her size, there was no mistaking the sharp intelligence and quiet confidence in her demeanor. Ellen had been chosen by Earth to represent humanity in the Galactic Council, a role that had come with both pride and significant pressure. And today, the pressure had never felt heavier. "You're late," a voice rumbled from one of the nearby seats. Ellen didn't look over at the speaker, nor did she need to, her mind was already processing the implications of what was unfolding before her. This was no ordinary session. At the far side of the chamber, an alien species called the Zarvan, giants whose skin shimmered like molten lava, stood in a circle, flanked by their representatives. Their facial expressions, though difficult to read, were menacing. Their long, sharp claws flexed at their sides as they exchanged words with the other races in the room. The Zarvan had a reputation for violence. They were known as both merciless conquerors and brilliant tacticians. There had been warnings about their increasingly aggressive behavior, but the Galactic Council had refused to listen. Some said that the Zarvan were simply playing a political game, while others whispered that their hunger for power was growing insatiable. Either way, the rumors of an impending war had remained just that, rumors. Until now. As Ellen took her seat, the room went silent. The council's speaker, an ancient being known as Vienok, raised one of his many wrinkled hands, signaling for the start of the meeting. The strange, crystalline sound of his voice echoed in the hall as he spoke. "We have gathered here today to discuss matters of great importance," Vienok said. His voice was calm, but his eyes, the only part of him that seemed truly alive, darted toward the Zarvan delegation. "As you all know, there have been disturbances in the Zarvan sector. Allegations of hostile activity and threats to neighboring systems have been reported. Today, we must determine our response." Ellen's heart sank. She knew this meeting would be difficult, but it seemed the rumors were true. The Zarvan were about to demand something, and the council was unsure of how to handle it. The Zarvan delegation's leader, a hulking figure named Varash, stepped forward. His massive frame seemed to block out the light as he loomed over the rest of the council. The air seemed to crackle with tension as his gaze swept across the room. "The Zarvan will no longer tolerate weakness in this council," Varash's voice boomed, vibrating the walls. "We demand action, now." Murmurs rippled through the room. Ellen's mind raced. She had been briefed on the situation beforehand, but nothing could prepare her for the way the Zarvan leader exuded dominance. There was an undeniable sense of power in the room, and it was clear to her that the stakes had just been raised. The Zarvan were no longer just a force to be reckoned with, they were a force demanding to be obeyed. "Action?" Vienok's voice was level, though it was impossible to hide the subtle tension. "What do you mean, Varash?" Varash's eyes narrowed, the fiery glow in his pupils almost searing. "We demand that the council take immediate steps to suppress the rebel forces in our sector. Their resistance is growing stronger. We have no choice but to act with force." A cold silence followed, and Ellen's instincts screamed at her. She had a bad feeling about this. The Zarvan weren't just speaking of squashing a rebellion, they were speaking of an invasion. And that wasn't something the council could simply ignore. there was no telling how many systems they'd wipe out in their quest for dominance. One of the smaller delegations, a race of silver-skinned beings called the Elkath, spoke up. "This is madness. You would threaten an entire region of the galaxy, just to suppress a few rebels? The consequences could be disastrous." "You speak as though it is your galaxy to protect," Varrash sneered. "You have no place in the Zarvan's affairs." It was then that Ellen knew something had to be done. The Galactic Council had been ignoring the warning signs for too long. The Zarvan's demands were not about peace or negotiation. This wasn't about suppressing rebellion. This was about control, and the Council was too busy arguing amongst themselves to recognize the threat. Ellen stood up, interrupting the rising chaos. "Enough," she said firmly. The room quieted instantly. Despite the overwhelming presence of the Zarvan, her voice commanded attention. "This isn't about the Zarvan or the rebels. This is about the stability of the entire galaxy. And right now, we're making the same mistake we always make, we're playing politics while the galaxy burns." The speaker's eyes fixed on her, and the Zarvan leader, Varrash, gave her a cold, measured glance. But Ellen didn't falter. "The Zarvan are not acting alone," she continued, locking eyes with Varrash. "They're not simply after rebellion. They're preparing for something much bigger, something we've all been ignoring. If we don't take a stand now, it will be too late." There was a pregnant pause, a long silence in which no one moved or spoke. The words were heavy, each one laden with the weight of what was to come. Finally, Viennock spoke, his voice calm, but with an edge of concern. "Commander Hale is correct. The Zarvan threat is not just a political issue. If we allow them to act without consequence, we risk the very stability of the entire Council." Ellen's pulse quickened. She had the Council's attention, but now came the hard part, convincing them to take action. But how could she persuade them when all they had done for years was sweep these problems under the rug? Varrash growled low, his massive form shifting slightly. "You've chosen your side then. But beware, humans are not prepared for the consequences of opposing the Zarvan." The warning was clear, and though Ellen's heart raced, she stood tall. It was now a game of survival, not just for humanity, but for every species in the galaxy. Ellen knew that this was only the beginning of a long and brutal conflict. The Zarvan had made their move, and the Council's indecision could cost them everything. If she had any hope of stopping what was coming, she would need to do what no one else had the courage to do, act before it was too late. But that would take more than words. It would take action. And that action would either save or destroy everything they had worked for. As the meeting adjourned, Ellen didn't sit back down. Instead, she turned to face the enormous, looming structure of the Galactic Council. She wasn't sure how she would do it, but she knew one thing: humanity's time had come. "You said." The silence in the Galactic Council chamber was deafening as Ellen Hale stood firm, facing the looming figure of Varrash, the Zarvan leader, whose eyes glowed with a molten fury. The tension in the room was palpable, a nearly tangible thing that weighed heavily on everyone present. It wasn't just the threat of the Zarvan invasion that hung in the air, it was the undeniable fact that the Galactic Council was paralyzed by its own bureaucracy. Alien species who had once stood together in unity were now divided, each too fearful of taking a bold step. Ellen had made a statement, but now came the more difficult part, turning words into action. "The Zarvan aren't just rebels or invaders," Ellen said, her voice steady, but her pulse quickening. "They're playing a long game, one that the Council has missed for too long. If we wait for the invasion to reach us, it will be too late. We need to act, now." The murmurs in the room grew louder. Some of the delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged uneasy glances. A few nodded in agreement, but the majority remained silent, unwilling to commit to a course of action that could spark galactic war. The Council had a long history of indecision, and this was no different. One of the representatives from the Quaran, a species with a chitinous exoskeleton and beady black eyes, stood. His voice was sharp, his words cutting through the murmur of dissent. "Commander Hale, you ask for action, but what action? We cannot simply declare war on the Zarvan without understanding their full intentions. We need more information. Ellen didn't flinch at the challenge. She had anticipated this. We've had the information for months, she said, her voice rising slightly. We've ignored the warnings. The Zarvan aren't just interested in quelling dissent. They're preparing for something far more dangerous. They want to control the entire galaxy, and they've already begun. The room erupted in chatter, as representatives began to speak over each other, some in disbelief, others in anger. Viennock, the council speaker, held up a hand, silencing the crowd with a simple gesture. His 1,000-year-old eyes regarded Ellen for a moment before speaking. Your concerns are valid, Commander Hale. But you must understand, we are not equipped for war, Viennock said, his voice soft but firm. The Zarvan are powerful, and their influence stretches far. We cannot make such a bold move without consensus. Ellen's frustration simmered. She had expected this response. The council had never been quick to act, too many voices, too many competing interests. But this wasn't a matter of diplomacy or negotiations anymore. It was survival. Then what do you suggest we do, Viennock? She asked, her voice sharp now. Wait until the Zarvan's fleet is on our doorstep? Watch as they dismantle everything we've worked for. This is not a matter of discussion. It's a matter of time. Another voice spoke up, one she hadn't expected. Zyron, a representative from the Kryn, a race of gas giant dwellers with translucent skin, floated up from his seat, his form billowing slightly in the gravity-less environment of the council chamber. Commander Hale is right. We've been far too passive, Zyron said, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the room. The Zarvan have been making moves for months, no, years. We cannot wait any longer. But, he hesitated, as if weighing his next words. We need a plan. And that, Commander, is where you come in. Ellen felt a flicker of hope rise within her. Zyron had always been a moderate voice in the council, often advocating for diplomacy over direct confrontation. For him to back her now meant something had shifted. I'm listening, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. This was the opening she had been waiting for. Zyron continued. We've long since relied on intelligence from the outer systems. But our satellites, our informants, they're not enough. What we need is someone to get on the ground, in the heart of the Zarvan sector, and find out what they're really planning. We need direct, on-the-ground intelligence. Ellen's mind raced. This was risky, recklessly so. No one had ever dared enter the heart of Zarvan space without permission. To send an agent would be a suicide mission, but it was also the only way to learn the truth. The Council had no other means of understanding what the Zarvan were really after. She needed to act quickly, but this wasn't a decision she could make on her own. Viennock, she said, turning to the speaker. I need authorization to form a special task force. We'll infiltrate the Zarvan sector, gather the intelligence we need, and then return with the evidence we can present to the Council. But I need full support, resources, ships, and a team of volunteers willing to risk everything. There was a long pause, the Council members deep in thought. Finally, Viennock spoke. We cannot give you carte blanche, Commander Hale. But you have our backing, for now. We will provide you with the resources you require, though you must know this, should the Zarvan catch wind of this operation, there will be no peace for any of us. Ellen didn't hesitate. She knew the stakes. She had to act, and she had to act fast. Thank you, Speaker Viennock, she said, rising from her seat. I won't let you down. The next few days were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Ellen worked tirelessly, assembling a team of the most skilled operatives from different species. It was a difficult task, convincing individuals to risk their lives in Zarvan space was no easy feat, but she had no choice. The fate of the galaxy was on the line. Her team was diverse, each member bringing a unique skill set to the table. There was Kira, a former Zarvan defector who had once been a high-ranking officer in their military before escaping to join the Council. She was invaluable, not just for her knowledge of Zarvan tactics, but for her ability to move within their ranks undetected. Then there was Jax, a human who specialized in covert operations. He was quiet, calculating, and lethal, exactly the kind of person Ellen needed on this mission. Rounding out the team was a small alien named Pax, a Clisher, who had the ability to interface with almost any technology. If anyone could get them inside Zarvan systems, it was Pax. They were a motley crew, each one driven by a common goal, to uncover the Zarvan's true intentions before it was too late. And yet, as they gathered aboard the Stellar Hawk, the ship that would take them into the heart of enemy territory, Ellen couldn't shake the feeling that she was leading them into a trap. The first few days of their journey were uneventful, but tension was high. They had no way of knowing how much of a threat the Zarvan posed, or how long they had before the invasion began. Ellen spent most of her time reviewing the intelligence they had, trying to piece together what little they knew about the Zarvan's movements. And then, on the fourth day of their journey, the Stellar Hawk entered the Zarvan sector. It was as if the very atmosphere changed the moment they crossed the boundary. The sensors flickered, warning lights blinking in a pattern that spoke of a danger just beyond their reach. "We're in," Jax muttered, his fingers tapping furiously at the console. "Now we wait for their next move." Ellen nodded, her mind racing. She knew the stakes. And this was just the beginning. The Zarvan sector was a vast, uncharted expanse, teeming with danger at every turn. Ellen Hale had known this, but standing on the edge of the abyss, so close to the heart of the Zarvan Empire, was something else entirely. The moment they had crossed the sector's boundary, a sharp, cold feeling had settled over her. It wasn't just the silent void of space, but the foreboding sense that the Zarvan were already aware of their presence. As the Stellar Hawk glided deeper into the sector, Ellen could feel her team's unease, their tension mounting with every passing moment. The ship's sensors were on high alert, flashing warnings about the unusual interference in the region's communication networks. Pax, the Clisher tech specialist, had been working tirelessly to reroute the ship's comms through different channels, trying to mask their signature and avoid detection. Still, Ellen couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Zarvan were no fools, and if they had even the slightest inkling of an infiltrator in their midst, they would act without hesitation. Kira, the Zarvan defector, sat silently at the tactical console, her sharp eyes scanning the readouts. The pale blue light from the console reflected off her smooth, featureless skin, making her look almost ghostly in the dim room. "They're watching us," she murmured, her voice low but filled with certainty. Ellen met Kira's gaze, her own eyes narrowing. "How do you know?" "Because I would be," Kira replied simply. "We've crossed into their space. If they haven't already detected us, they will soon." The situation was growing more precarious with every minute. They had crossed into the heart of Zarvan territory without incident, but Ellen knew it was only a matter of time before their presence was discovered. She needed answers, and quickly. But how could she get close to the Zarvan without risking their lives, or worse, a galactic-scale war? As Ellen stood by the bridge, watching the view ahead, a field of stars that seemed as cold and distant as the Zarvan themselves, she heard a soft chime. Pax's voice crackled over the comms. "We've got a hit," Pax said, his tone urgent. "Zarvan encryption. The ship's network is firing up in an area just ahead. We need to move fast before they realize we're not supposed to be here." Ellen didn't hesitate. "Set course for the signal source. No detours. We're going in." The Stellar Hawk lurched as the engines powered up, heading toward the source of the Zarvan encryption. The crew was on edge, each person bracing for the inevitable confrontation. They had come for information, but it seemed the Zarvan were already one step ahead. If they couldn't find out what was happening now, their mission would be a failure, and their lives would be in grave danger. As the ship moved deeper into the sector, Ellen took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The team had come this far, and they were all in it together. She glanced around at each member of her crew, Kira, Jax, Pax, and herself, and knew they all understood the risks. If they failed, it wouldn't just be their lives on the line. It would be the future of the galaxy. They arrived at the coordinates just as the signal disappeared from their radar. The timing was uncanny. Ellen's heart skipped a beat. The Zarvan were manipulating the situation. The fact that the encryption had cut out just as they were closing and told her everything she needed to know, they were being led into a trap. "Get us out of here!" Jax yelled, his voice filled with panic. He had his hands on the control panel, but the ship's systems were locking down, not responding to his commands. Pax cursed under his breath as he worked furiously at his console, trying to override the lock. "This isn't good. We're locked in, there's a Zarvan fleet on the other side of the asteroid field, and they're closing in fast." Ellen felt a chill in her bones. The Zarvan had known they would come. They had baited them here with the signal, a trap designed to lure them into the open. And now, surrounded by an asteroid field with no way to escape, they were cornered. The Zarvan's fleet was closing in, and the Stellar Hawk was in no condition to stand against them. "We need to get to the surface," Kira said suddenly, her voice steady despite the rising panic in the room. "The Zarvan know the layout of the asteroid field better than anyone. But there's a base nearby, a secret installation. We can hide there." Ellen didn't hesitate. "Set course for the base. Full speed." As the Stellar Hawk veered off course, weaving through the asteroid field at breakneck speeds, Ellen braced herself for the inevitable pursuit. Behind them, the Zarvan fleet moved in, the distance between them rapidly shrinking. "This is going to be close," Jax muttered, his fingers dancing across the control panels as he expertly navigated the ship through the dangerous asteroid field. Pax's voice crackled over the comms again. "We're being tracked. They're locking onto us. If we don't make it to the base in the next 5 minutes, we're done." The pressure mounted. Ellen's mind raced, calculating their options. The base Kira had mentioned could be their only hope if they could make it there in time. But it was a long shot. The Zarvan were known for their speed, and the Stellar Hawk was no match for their ships in open space. The asteroid field seemed to close in on them, massive rocks drifting in all directions, some so large they seemed capable of crushing them in an instant. Ellen's grip tightened on the armrest of her seat. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about survival, this was about a future that depended on the choices they made in the next few moments. The ship jerked violently as an explosion rocked the hull. The Zarvan had fired their first shot. "They're firing!" Jack shouted, trying desperately to keep the ship under control. "I can't get a lock on the asteroids to shield us. We need to outmaneuver them." Ellen's mind worked quickly. The Zarvan had superior firepower, but the asteroid field gave them a chance to make it out alive. They just needed to buy time. "Jax, take us into that canyon, now!" Ellen ordered, her voice unwavering despite the chaos around her. "Pax, activate the cloaking mechanism. We need to be invisible to them." Pax nodded without hesitation, his fingers flying over the controls. "Activating cloaking now." The ship lurched again, this time violently as another shot hit the hull. But the Stellar Hawk was no longer visible to the Zarvan fleet. The cloaking device worked. Ellen didn't relax for a second. They had bought themselves time, but not much. "Kira, how far is the base?" "3 clicks ahead," Kira replied, her voice calm as ever. "We can make it. We just need to stay hidden for a little longer." The next few minutes felt like hours. Every corner they turned, every asteroid they navigated, brought them closer to their goal, and closer to disaster. Ellen could hear the pounding of her heart in her ears as the Zarvan ships drew closer, but the cloak kept them hidden, their movements masked by the shimmering energy shield around the ship. At last, the base loomed ahead, a dark, nondescript facility nestled within the heart of the asteroid. Its sleek design blended perfectly with the surrounding rock, a perfect hiding place. "Docking in 3, Jax called out. "Get ready." The Stellar Hawk slammed into the docking bay with a heavy thud. The ship's systems powered down, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. "We're in," Ellen breathed out. "Now, let's find out what the Zarvan are really up to." The mission was far from over. They had made it inside, but the hardest part was yet to come. The air inside the Zarvan base was cold, sterile, and devoid of warmth. Ellen Hale stood at the entrance of the docking bay, her breath barely visible in the dim light of the underground complex. Every step she took echoed off the metallic floors, and every shadow felt like an enemy's watchful eye. The tension that had been building since they entered the Zarvan sector was palpable now. There was no turning back. This base, with its high-tech security systems, was both their temporary refuge and their ultimate test. Her team was already moving swiftly, their actions synchronized, prepared for the unknowns of the base. The small, tight-knit group had been through hell and back already, but now they were about to delve into the very heart of the Zarvan military operation. The stakes were higher than ever, everything depended on what they found here. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance. "Stay close," Ellen whispered to her crew as they moved deeper into the facility. "We don't know who's inside, or what kind of defenses they've got." Kira led the way, her Zarvan expertise invaluable as they navigated the maze-like corridors. She was their guide, her knowledge of Zarvan architecture and security systems allowing them to avoid the most obvious traps. Despite her calm exterior, Ellen knew that Kira was still haunted by her past, by the people she had left behind when she defected. Yet, in this moment, she was a fierce ally, unwavering in her commitment to the mission. "Keep your eyes open," Jax muttered, his fingers running over the hilt of his weapon, his instincts constantly on high alert. "This place feels like a powder keg ready to explode." They reached a door marked with a symbol Ellen didn't recognize, a glyph that seemed to pulse faintly with a strange energy. Pax stepped forward, scanning the area with his handheld device. "It's locked with an advanced encryption," Pax said, his voice steady. "It's more complex than anything we've seen before, but I can bypass it." "Do it," Ellen urged, her gaze fixed on the door. Time was not on their side, and they needed to move fast. Pax worked quickly, his slender fingers moving across the device's interface with precise skill. The tension in the air was almost suffocating as they waited, but Ellen knew that every second counted. The Zarvan would be searching for them soon, and if they didn't uncover the truth of their plans, it could be the end of everything. "Got it," Pax said with a satisfied click, the door sliding open with a hiss. Beyond it, they could see what looked like a control room, a dark space filled with screens and terminals, all humming with activity. As they entered, the team spread out, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning every corner. The room was unsettlingly quiet for such a high-tech hub. And yet, the lack of immediate threats only heightened the danger. The Zarvan were always one step ahead, and Ellen had a sinking feeling that they were walking right into the lion's den. "This place is too quiet," Jax muttered, his voice low. "No guards? No security drones?" Ellen's instincts told her the same thing. Something wasn't right. She moved toward the central terminal, trying to make sense of the data on the screens. "Pax, can you get any useful intel from these systems?" Pax nodded, typing rapidly on one of the terminals. His eyes flicked between the screens, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a few moments, he turned to Ellen, his expression grim. "They're not just building an army," Pax said, his voice low, filled with disbelief. "They've already started something else." Ellen's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" Pax's hand hovered over the screen, showing her a schematic of what could only be described as a massive, planet-killing weapon. The design was alien to her, unlike anything she had ever seen, but its purpose was unmistakable. It was a superweapon, and judging by the readings, it was already nearing completion. "They're going to use it to destabilize entire systems," Pax continued, his voice thick with dread. "If they launch this, it'll send shockwaves through the galaxy. Planets will crumble under its force." Ellen felt a cold wave of realization crash over her. The Zarvan had never been content with small-scale conquests. They were preparing for total galactic domination. This was no longer just a conflict between factions, it was the beginning of a galactic apocalypse. But just as the gravity of their discovery hit, the sound of alarms pierced the silence. Red lights flashed throughout the room, and the door slammed shut with a loud thud. The base was locking them in. We've been compromised, Kira said sharply, her voice tense. We need to move, now. Ellen's mind raced. Their mission had just taken a dire turn. The Zarvan knew they were here, and they were coming for them. There was no time to waste. But even as they prepared to fight their way out, Ellen knew one thing with absolute certainty: the information they had uncovered here was too important to leave behind. They couldn't let the Zarvan get their hands on it. Pax, Ellen said urgently, can you send the data back to the Council? We need them to know what's coming. Pax hesitated, his eyes flicking between the terminal and the door. It'll take too long. If we don't act fast, they'll have us. Then we make it quick, Ellen ordered, her voice decisive. We don't leave without that data. As the team fought their way to the data core, Ellen couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. Every move they made was a calculated risk. The Zarvan would stop at nothing to ensure their weapon remained a secret, and if they were caught, there would be no escape. The hallways around them began to flood with Zarvan soldiers, their glowing eyes piercing the dark. Ellen's breath came in short bursts as she sprinted down the corridor, her team following in perfect formation. The sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the echo of distant explosions, fires started by their desperate battle to escape. They fought as they ran, cutting down Zarvan soldiers who were too slow to get out of their way. The sounds of battle were everywhere now: laser fire, explosions, and the deafening roar of pursuing ships. Ellen's heart hammered in her chest as she reached the data core. Pax was already hard at work, tapping at the interface. The seconds stretched out like hours as the doors behind them slammed open, revealing more soldiers. Almost there. Pax shouted. Do it now! Ellen ordered. With a final, triumphant click, the data was transferred to the Council's secure channels. Ellen felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. The Zarvan were closing in, and they had no way of stopping them. Jax threw a grenade toward the approaching soldiers, giving them a brief opening to flee. Get to the ship, now! Ellen shouted. As the Stellar Hawk came into view, they made a final sprint, the sound of Zarvan footsteps growing louder behind them. The team piled into the ship, weapons still raised, and the engines roared to life. Ellen's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. They had done it. They had exposed the truth, but the cost was enormous. The Zarvan would be waiting for them when they left, and they knew it. The ship shot out of the asteroid base, weaving through the fields of debris as they raced toward safety. The Zarvan's fleet wasn't far behind, but Ellen didn't look back. They had accomplished their mission, and the data was safe. We're not out of the woods yet, Kira said quietly, glancing at Ellen. But we did it. The galaxy knows now. Ellen nodded, a grim smile tugging at her lips. They had survived the impossible. They had shown the galaxy that humanity wasn't just a footnote in the history of the stars. And they would keep fighting. Because the Zarvan were coming for them all. And when they did, humanity would be ready. They had warned them all.